Question 1. When evaluating a significant identified risk of a potential data breach stemming from an outdated yet critical electronic health record system that cannot be immediately replaced due to budget constraints, which risk treatment strategy, when implemented with appropriate safeguards, best aligns with the principles of the HIPAA security rule and ethical patient data protection? Option A. Accept the risk as is, relying on existing, albeit limited, security measures and focus budget on other, less critical security initiatives. Option B. Immediately decommission the legacy system, even if it means temporarily halting certain patient care services, to completely eliminate the risk of a breach from this specific system. Option C. Implement a comprehensive mitigation plan that includes enhanced access controls, regular security audits of the system, and a phased approach to eventual system replacement, while documenting the rationale for not immediately avoiding the risk due to operational necessity. Option D. Purchase a comprehensive cyber insurance policy to cover potential financial losses from a breach, and consider this sufficient to address the identified risk. The correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive mitigation plan that includes enhanced access controls, regular security audits of the system, and a phased approach to eventual system replacement, while documenting the rationale for not immediately avoiding the risk due to operational necessity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in healthcare privacy and security, balancing the need for robust security measures with the operational realities and financial constraints of a healthcare organization. The Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, is tasked with managing a significant identified risk, a potential data breach due to an outdated but critical system. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate risk treatment strategy when faced with limited resources and competing priorities. A hasty decision could lead to regulatory noncompliance, financial penalties, reputational damage, and harm to patients. A failure to act decisively could also have severe consequences. The CISO must navigate these complexities while adhering to the principles of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, security rule, which mandates risk analysis and management. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach involves a thorough risk assessment and the selection of a mitigation strategy that balances effectiveness with feasibility. This aligns with the HIPAA security rule's requirement for covered entities to implement security measures sufficient to reduce risks and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level. Mitigation, in this context, would involve implementing technical and administrative safeguards to reduce the likelihood and impact of a breach from the legacy system, such as enhanced monitoring, access controls, or developing a plan for eventual replacement. This strategy acknowledges the risk, takes concrete steps to reduce it, and is often the most practical approach when immediate avoidance or transfer is not feasible or cost-effective. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to protecting electronic protected health information, E5. Incorrect approach is analysis. Accepting the risk without further action is a failure to comply with HIPAA mandate to manage identified risks. While risk acceptance is a valid strategy for low-impact or low-likelihood risks, a potential data breach from a critical system is unlikely to fall into this category. This approach would expose the organization to significant liability and patient harm. Transferring the risk solely through insurance without implementing any internal controls is also insufficient. While cyber insurance can help offset financial losses from a breach, it does not absolve the organization of its responsibility to implement security safeguards as required by HIPAA. Relying solely on insurance without mitigation is a form of negligence. Avoiding the risk by immediately decommissioning the system without a viable alternative or a phased transition plan could disrupt critical patient care operations. While avoidance is a strong risk treatment strategy, it must be implemented in a way that does not create new, potentially greater, risks to patient safety or organizational function. This approach might be considered if the risk is so severe that no other treatment is feasible, but it requires careful planning to ensure continuity of care. Professional reasoning. When faced with such a scenario, a healthcare privacy and security professional should follow a structured risk management process. This involves 1. Clearly identifying and documenting the risk in the risk register. 2. Analyzing the likelihood and impact of the risk, considering regulatory requirements, HIPAA security rule. 3. evaluating all available risk treatment strategies, avoidance, transfer, mitigation, acceptance in the context of the organization's resources, operational needs, and the severity of the risk. 4. Selecting the strategy that provides the most reasonable and appropriate level of security, often a combination of strategies. 5. Developing a detailed plan for implementing the chosen strategy, including timelines, responsibilities, and resource allocation. 6. Continuously monitoring the effectiveness of the implemented controls and reviewing the risk register periodically or when significant changes occur. 7. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them for audit and compliance purposes. Question 2. The efficiency study reveals that the current process for accessing patient demographic and insurance information for billing purposes is time-consuming, leading to delays in claim submission. The IT department proposes a solution to grant all administrative staff read-only access to the entire patient database to expedite information retrieval. A privacy officer is concerned about the potential implications of this broad access. Option A. Restrict access to patient demographic and insurance information to a small, dedicated billing team, and require all other administrative staff to submit a formal request for each piece of information needed, which will be reviewed by a supervisor. Option B. Implement a role-based access control system that grants administrative staff access only to the specific demographic and insurance fields necessary for billing, coupled with mandatory annual HIPAA training focused on the minimum necessary standard and proper handling of PHI. Option C. Grant all administrative staff read-only access to the entire patient database as proposed by IT, with the understanding that they will be instructed to only view the necessary information for billing. Option D. Develop a new, separate database containing only the demographic and insurance information required for billing and grant all administrative staff access to this new database. The correct answer is B. Implement a role-based access control system that grants administrative staff access only to the specific demographic and insurance fields necessary for billing, coupled with mandatory annual HIPAA training focused on the minimum necessary standard and proper handling of PHI. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a covered entity to balance the operational need for efficiency with its stringent legal obligations under the HIPAA privacy rule. The core conflict lies in how to streamline a process without compromising the privacy and security of protected health information, FI, or violating patient rights. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any efficiency gains do not lead to regulatory noncompliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the minimum necessary standard mandated by the HIPAA privacy rule. This standard requires covered entities to make reasonable efforts to limit the use or disclosure of PHI to the minimum necessary to accomplish the intended purpose. By implementing a role-based access system and providing targeted training, the organization ensures that only individuals who require specific PHI for their job functions can access it, thereby minimizing the risk of inappropriate use or disclosure. This proactive measure aligns with the spirit and letter of HIPAA, protecting patient privacy while still allowing for necessary operational functions. An incorrect approach that involves broadly sharing PHI with all staff for awareness purposes fails to adhere to the minimum necessary standard. This indiscriminate disclosure increases the risk of unauthorized access, use, or disclosure of PHI, potentially leading to breaches and violations of patient privacy rights. It also demonstrates a lack of understanding of the specific safeguards required by HIPAA. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on technological solutions without addressing human factors or training is also professionally unacceptable. Technology can play a role in security. It is not a substitute for proper policies, procedures, and employee education. Without adequate training on PHI handling and privacy obligations, even the most sophisticated technology can be circumvented or misused by staff. This approach neglects the human element, which is critical for maintaining privacy and security. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of access over privacy controls, such as allowing unrestricted access to PHI for all employees, represents a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This directly contravenes the fundamental principles of HIPAA, which are designed to protect patient confidentiality. Such an approach would likely result in significant penalties and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment. This includes identifying the specific PHI involved, the intended purpose of its use or disclosure, and the individuals or groups who will have access. Based on this assessment, appropriate safeguards, including technical, physical, and administrative controls, should be implemented. Training and ongoing monitoring are essential to ensure compliance. When considering efficiency improvements, the primary question should always be, can this be done without compromising the privacy and security of PHI and without violating patient rights? Question 3. The risk matrix shows a critical vulnerability in the patient portal's authentication mechanism, indicating a high likelihood of unauthorized access. Given the organization's current NIST cybersecurity framework implementation tier of adaptable and a framework profile focused on essential security controls, which of the following actions best aligns with a comprehensive and compliant response? Option A. Implement multi-factor authentication for all patient portal logins and conduct regular vulnerability assessments of the authentication system. Option B. Increase the frequency of intrusion detection system alerts for the patient portal and develop a more detailed incident response plan for authentication breaches. Option C. Invest in advanced threat intelligence feeds specifically for healthcare-related cyber threats and deploy a security information and event management SIEM system to aggregate logs from all network devices. Option D. Update the organization's acceptable use policy to explicitly prohibit sharing patient portal credentials and provide annual security awareness training to all staff. The correct answer is A. Implement multi-factor authentication for all patient portal logins and conduct regular vulnerability assessments of the authentication system. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare cybersecurity, balancing the need for robust security controls with the practical realities of resource constraints and operational workflows. The risk matrix, a standard tool for prioritizing security efforts, highlights a critical vulnerability. The challenge lies in translating this identified risk into an effective and compliant response, considering the specific requirements of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF, and its application within the U.S. healthcare regulatory landscape, particularly HIPAA. The organization must not only address the technical aspects of the vulnerability, but also ensure the chosen solution aligns with its current implementation tier and contributes to a comprehensive framework profile. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging the NIST CSF's identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover functions to address the identified risk. Specifically, it focuses on enhancing the protect function by implementing technical controls to mitigate the vulnerability. This aligns with the CSF's emphasis on proactive measures to prevent security incidents. Furthermore, it considers the organization's current implementation tier, ensuring the proposed solution is feasible and sustainable. The chosen solution also contributes to a more mature framework profile by strengthening the overall security posture. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified risk using a structured, risk-based methodology mandated by the NIST CSF, which is a foundational element for HIPAA security rule compliance. It demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement and a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity, rather than a piecemeal or reactive one. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the detect function without adequately strengthening the protect function. While detection is crucial, a strategy that prioritizes identifying breaches over preventing them, especially for a known critical vulnerability, fails to meet the proactive requirements of the NIST CSF and HIPAA. This approach is ethically and regulatorily deficient, as it leaves the organization exposed to a high probability of compromise, potentially leading to significant data breaches and associated penalties. Another incorrect approach is to implement a solution that significantly exceeds the organization's current implementation tier without a clear roadmap or justification. This can lead to wasted resources, operational disruption, and a failure to achieve the intended security outcomes. From a regulatory perspective, while aiming for higher security is generally good, an unmanaged leap can indicate poor risk management and a lack of strategic planning, which are implicitly expected under HIPAA. A third incorrect approach is to address the vulnerability by solely relying on policy updates without corresponding technical controls. Policies are essential, but without the technical safeguards to enforce them, they are insufficient to protect sensitive healthcare information. This approach fails to meet the protect function of the NIST-CSF and would be considered a significant deficiency under the HIPAA security rule, which mandates technical safeguards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such scenarios by first thoroughly understanding the risk identified in the matrix. They should then map this risk to the relevant NIST-CSF functions and subcategories. The next step is to assess the organization's current implementation tier and framework profile to determine the most appropriate and feasible solutions. This involves considering existing resources, technical capabilities, and operational impact. The decision-making process should prioritize solutions that offer the greatest risk reduction while aligning with regulatory requirements, HIPAA security rule in this context, and the organization's strategic objectives. Continuous monitoring and reassessment are also critical to ensure the effectiveness of implemented controls and to adapt to evolving threats. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates that the organization has adopted the HITRUST-CSF, but is struggling to determine the appropriate implementation level for various control categories. Given the organization's limited budget and a recent increase in sophisticated cyber threats targeting healthcare entities, what is the most prudent approach to implementing the HITRUST-CSF controls? Option A. Implement only the baseline security controls mandated by HIPAA, as this represents the minimum regulatory requirement and is the most cost-effective approach. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify critical assets and vulnerabilities, then prioritize the implementation of controls based on risk, regulatory requirements, and business impact, allowing for varying implementation levels across control categories. Option C. Apply the highest implementation level across all HITRUST-CSF control categories to ensure maximum security and compliance, regardless of resource constraints. Option D. Focus implementation efforts on controls that are easily demonstrable and require minimal technical expertise, as these will provide the most immediate visible security improvements. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify critical assets and vulnerabilities, then prioritize the implementation of controls based on risk, regulatory requirements, and business impact, allowing for varying implementation levels across control categories. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare organizations, balancing the comprehensive requirements of a robust security framework like HITRUST-CSF with the practical realities of resource allocation and organizational maturity. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the organization's current state against the framework's control objectives and determining the appropriate implementation level without compromising patient privacy or security or incurring unnecessary costs. The need to align with regulatory expectations, such as those implicitly or explicitly referenced by CHPS exam content, which focuses on U.S. healthcare regulations like HIPAA, adds another layer of complexity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the organization's existing security controls against the HITRUST-CSF's control categories and their respective implementation levels. This requires a thorough understanding of the CSF's prescriptive guidance and risk-based methodology. By assessing the organization's current maturity and identifying gaps, a phased implementation plan can be developed. This plan should prioritize controls based on risk, regulatory requirements, e.g., HIPAA security rule, and business impact. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring that security investments are targeted, effective, and demonstrably meet the organization's obligations under relevant privacy and security laws. It also allows for a scalable approach to achieving compliance and security assurance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Adopting a one-size-fits-all approach by applying the highest implementation level across all controls without a proper risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the principle of proportionality inherent in many regulatory frameworks and can lead to inefficient resource allocation, potentially diverting funds from critical areas. It also overlooks the risk-based nature of HITRUST-CSF, which allows for tailored implementation based on an organization's specific risk profile, implementing only the minimum required controls dictated by basic regulatory compliance, e.g., HIPAA baseline requirements, without considering the broader HITRUST-CSF objectives is also professionally flawed. While meeting baseline regulatory requirements is essential, it may not adequately address the full spectrum of security risks faced by a healthcare organization in today's threat landscape. This approach risks leaving the organization vulnerable to sophisticated threats and may not satisfy the intent of a comprehensive security framework like HITRUST CSF, which aims for a higher standard of assurance, focusing solely on controls that are easiest to implement or most visible to external auditors. Without a comprehensive risk assessment or consideration of the HITRUST CSF's control categories and their interdependencies, is a superficial approach. This can create a false sense of security and leave significant vulnerabilities unaddressed. It fails to demonstrate a commitment to a holistic security posture and may not meet the due diligence expectations of regulatory bodies or industry best practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the organization's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. This is followed by a detailed assessment of the HITRUST CSF's control objectives and implementation levels. A gap analysis comparing current state to desired state, informed by risk assessment, is crucial. Prioritization of remediation efforts should be based on risk, regulatory impact, and business criticality. Finally, a continuous monitoring and improvement process ensures ongoing alignment with the framework and evolving threat landscape. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal that the organization's business impact analysis, BIA, has not been formally reviewed or updated in over 3 years, despite significant advancements in electronic health record (EHR) system capabilities and the implementation of new telehealth services. Which of the following actions is the most appropriate next step to ensure the organization's preparedness for disruptions? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the BIA to revalidate critical business functions, their interdependencies, and the established recovery time, objectives RTO, and recovery point objectives RPO against current operational realities and regulatory mandates. Option B. Prioritize the recovery of newly implemented telehealth services in the next disaster recovery test, as they represent the most visible patient-facing technology. Option C. Assume the existing BIA remains valid as the core EHR system has not undergone major architectural changes, and focus resources on testing the current disaster recovery plan. Option D. Rely on the EHR vendor's documented recovery capabilities to define the organization's RTOs and RPOs for all critical functions. The correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the BIA to revalidate critical business functions, their interdependencies, and the established recovery time objectives RTO and recovery point objectives RPO against current operational realities and regulatory mandates. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational continuity with the long-term strategic implications of resource allocation and risk management. A healthcare organization's ability to recover critical functions within defined timeframes is paramount to patient care and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the interdependencies of systems and processes, the potential impact of disruptions, and the realistic recovery capabilities, all while adhering to stringent privacy and security regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves a systematic review of the business impact analysis, BIA, to validate critical business functions, their interdependencies, and the established recovery time objectives RTO and recovery point objectives RPO against current operational realities and regulatory mandates, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA security rule, specifically the requirements for risk analysis and contingency planning. By ensuring the BIA accurately reflects the current state, the organization can develop and maintain effective disaster recovery and business continuity plans that meet HIPAA objectives for protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic protected health information, E5. This proactive validation ensures that recovery strategies are relevant, achievable, and compliant, minimizing potential harm to patients and the organization. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume the existing BIA remains valid without periodic review, especially after significant system upgrades or changes in operational workflows. This failure to reevaluate critical functions and their recovery metrics could lead to RTOs and RPOs that are no longer achievable, violating the spirit and letter of HIPAA contingency planning requirements. It creates a false sense of security, leaving the organization vulnerable to data loss or prolonged downtime, which could result in breaches of patient privacy and security. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize the recovery of non-critical functions over those directly impacting patient care, or EPHI access. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the core purpose of a BIA and contingency planning under HIPAA, which is to ensure the continued availability of essential services and the protection of sensitive information. Such a prioritization could lead to regulatory penalties and a severe erosion of patient trust. A third incorrect approach would be to base RTOs and RPOs solely on vendor-provided service level agreements, SLAs, without independent validation of their impact on the organization's specific critical functions and patient care needs. While vendor SLAs are important, they do not inherently guarantee that the organization's unique operational requirements and regulatory obligations will be met. This could lead to non-compliance with HIPAA requirements for ensuring the integrity and availability of EPHI. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach BIA validation by first understanding the organization's mission-critical functions, particularly those involving patient care and the handling of EPHI. They should then systematically map these functions to the underlying IT systems, applications, and personnel. The next step is to critically assess the established RTOs and RPOs, considering the potential impact of exceeding them on patient safety, regulatory compliance, and financial stability. This assessment should involve input from various stakeholders, including IT, clinical staff, and compliance officers. Finally, any discrepancies or outdated information identified should be used to update the BIA and subsequently revise the contingency and disaster recovery plans, ensuring they remain aligned with current operational realities and regulatory requirements. Question 6. The performance metrics show an increase in reported incidents involving unsecured protected health information, FI, originating from a contracted business associate. The organization's compliance officer is tasked with determining the appropriate course of action under the HITECH Act. Which of the following actions best reflects the organization's responsibilities and the HITECH Act's provisions regarding breach notification, business associate liability, and enforcement? Option A. Immediately initiate the breach notification process to affected individuals and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, while simultaneously reviewing the business associate agreement to determine contractual remedies and reporting obligations to the Office for Civil Rights, OCR, for potential enforcement action against the business associate. Option B. Focus solely on rectifying the immediate technical vulnerability within the business associate systems and defer any notification or liability discussions until the business associate has fully resolved the issue. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive internal audit of the organization's own systems to identify any potential contributing factors before notifying any external parties or addressing the business associate's role. Option D. Inform the business associate that they are solely responsible for all breach notification and reporting requirements, and the organization will not be involved in any further actions. Correct answer is A. Immediately initiate the breach notification process to affected individuals and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, while simultaneously reviewing the business associate agreement to determine contractual remedies and reporting obligations to the Office for Civil Rights, OCR, for potential enforcement action against the business associate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential breach of unsecured protected health information, FI, by a business associate, requiring swift and accurate adherence to the HITECH Act's breach notification requirements. The organization must balance the need for immediate action to mitigate harm with the legal obligations to notify affected individuals, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, HHS, and potentially the media, all while ensuring the business associate is held accountable. The complexity arises from determining the scope of the breach, the notification timelines, and the appropriate enforcement actions under HITECH. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to determine if an unsecured PHI breach occurred, followed by strict adherence to the HITECH Act's notification timelines and content requirements. This includes notifying affected individuals without unreasonable delay and no later than 60 days after discovery, notifying the Secretary of HHS, and if the breach affects 500 or more individuals, notifying prominent media outlets. It also necessitates holding the business associate liable for their role in the breach, potentially through contractual remedies, and by reporting their noncompliance to HHS for enforcement. This approach aligns with the HITECH Act's intent to protect patient privacy and ensure accountability for breaches. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to delay notification to affected individuals and HHS while awaiting a full internal audit of the business associate's systems, exceeding the 60-day notification deadline. This failure directly violates the HITECH Act's mandatory timelines, exposing the covered entity to significant penalties and eroding patient trust. Another incorrect approach would be to only address the breach internally and not pursue any action against the business associate, despite their direct involvement. This neglects the HITECH Act's provisions for business associate liability and the requirement to report such failures to HHS, undermining the enforcement mechanisms designed to deter future breaches. A third incorrect approach would be to provide incomplete or misleading information in the breach notifications, failing to meet the content requirements stipulated by the HITECH Act. This can lead to further regulatory scrutiny and legal challenges, as it does not adequately inform individuals of the risks they face. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first establishing a clear incident response plan that incorporates HITECH Act requirements. This plan should outline steps for breach assessment, notification procedures, and business associate management. When a potential breach is identified, the immediate priority is to conduct a risk assessment to determine if it constitutes a reportable breach of unsecured PHI. If it does, all notification obligations must be met within the specified timeframes. Concurrently, the organization must review its business associate agreements and take appropriate action to hold the business associate accountable, including reporting their non-compliance to HHS if necessary. This systematic approach ensures compliance, mitigates harm, and upholds ethical responsibilities to protect patient privacy. Question 7. Operational review demonstrates a significant increase in the number of identified vulnerabilities across the healthcare organization's IT infrastructure following recent vulnerability scanning and penetration testing exercises. The IT security team has a limited window to implement patches and remediation actions before the next scheduled compliance audit. Which approach to vulnerability remediation would best align with the Certified in Healthcare Privacy and Security (CHPS). Exams focus on regulatory compliance and process optimization under U.S. healthcare regulations. Option A. Focus remediation efforts exclusively on vulnerabilities identified in the most recent penetration test, assuming older, unaddressed vulnerabilities are less critical. Option B. Prioritize remediation efforts based on a risk assessment that considers the potential impact of each vulnerability on protected health information, PHI, and the likelihood of exploitation, allocating resources to address the highest-risk vulnerabilities first, regardless of their age or the ease of patching. Option C. Address all newly discovered vulnerabilities immediately, focusing on those that are easiest and quickest to patch, to demonstrate a high volume of remediation activity before the audit. Option D. Implement a comprehensive patch management strategy that addresses all vulnerabilities in the order they were discovered, ensuring a systematic and documented approach to remediation. The correct answer is B. Prioritize remediation efforts based on a risk assessment that considers the potential impact of each vulnerability on protected health information, PHI, and the likelihood of exploitation, allocating resources to address the highest-risk vulnerabilities first, regardless of their age or the ease of patching. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare organizations, balancing the need for robust vulnerability management with operational constraints and resource limitations. The professional challenge lies in identifying the most effective and compliant strategy for addressing identified vulnerabilities within a defined timeframe, ensuring patient data protection and regulatory adherence. Careful judgment is required to prioritize remediation efforts based on risk and impact, rather than simply addressing the most numerous or easily fixed issues. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of risk-based security and proactive threat mitigation, which are fundamental to healthcare privacy and security. By prioritizing vulnerabilities based on their potential impact on protected health information, and the likelihood of exploitation, the organization can most effectively allocate resources to protect sensitive data. This approach is directly supported by the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, security rule, which mandates risk analysis and the implementation of security measures sufficient to reduce risks and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level. Specifically, the requirement to conduct regular risk assessments, 45 CFR Section 164, 308A1, Roman 2A, and implement a security awareness and training program, 45 CFR Section 164, 308A, 5I, indirectly supports a prioritized remediation strategy by ensuring staff are aware of threats and that resources are directed where they are most needed to protect EPHI. Furthermore, a proactive, risk-based approach fosters a culture of security and demonstrates due diligence in protecting patient privacy. Addressing vulnerabilities solely based on the ease of remediation or the sheer volume of findings represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the core principle of risk management, which is to protect the most sensitive data and critical systems first. Failing to prioritize based on potential impact on PHI violates the spirit and letter of HIPAA, which mandates the protection of EPHI from unauthorized access, use, or disclosure. Such a strategy could lead to the exploitation of high-risk vulnerabilities that are overlooked in favor of less critical ones, resulting in data breaches and significant financial and reputational damage. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of commitment to patient privacy and security, potentially exposing individuals to harm. Another incorrect approach, focusing only on newly discovered vulnerabilities while neglecting older, unaddressed ones, also presents regulatory and ethical issues. While addressing new threats is important, a backlog of unaddressed vulnerabilities, especially those with known exploits, creates a persistent and unacceptable risk. This can be seen as a failure to implement and maintain appropriate security measures as required by HIPAA 45 CFR Section 164, 308A1, Roman 2. It suggests a reactive rather than proactive security posture, which is insufficient for protecting sensitive healthcare data. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic risk assessment framework. This includes 1. Identifying all discovered vulnerabilities through regular scanning and testing. 2. Assessing the potential impact of each vulnerability on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI. 3. Evaluating the likelihood of exploitation for each vulnerability, considering factors like exploit availability and the presence of the vulnerable system in the external network. 4. Prioritizing vulnerabilities based on a combination of impact and likelihood, e.g., high impact/high likelihood first. 5. Developing and executing a remediation plan that addresses prioritized vulnerabilities within defined timelines, considering resource availability and potential operational disruption. 6. Continuously monitoring and reevaluating the effectiveness of remediation efforts and the overall security posture. This iterative process ensures that security efforts are focused, effective, and compliant with regulatory requirements. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new AI-powered diagnostic tool could significantly reduce operational costs and improve diagnostic accuracy, but it would involve processing a large volume of patient data. Which of the following approaches best aligns with healthcare privacy and security best practices and regulatory requirements? Option A. Proceed with implementation immediately to realize the cost savings, relying on the vendor's built-in security features to protect patient data. Option B. Focus primarily on the cost savings and improve diagnostic accuracy, assuming that any privacy or security concerns can be addressed reactively if they arise. Option C. Conduct a thorough privacy and security impact assessment to identify potential risks to protected health information, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies before deployment. Option D. Delay the privacy and security assessment until after the tool has been in use for a period, to avoid disrupting the implementation timeline. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough privacy and security impact assessment to identify potential risks to protected health information, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies before deployment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the potential benefits of a new technology with the significant privacy and security risks it introduces to protected health information. 5. The organization must make a decision that aligns with its legal obligations under HIPAA, ethical responsibilities to patients, and operational needs. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any decision is not only cost-effective, but also compliant and secure. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and documented assessment of privacy and security risks before implementation. This aligns directly with the HIPAA security rules requirement for risk analysis and risk management. By conducting a comprehensive impact assessment, the organization proactively identifies potential vulnerabilities, evaluates the likelihood and impact of threats, and develops appropriate safeguards. This systematic approach ensures that the organization can make an informed decision about whether to proceed with the technology, and if so, how to implement it securely and in compliance with HIPAA. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to protecting patient data. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings without adequately addressing privacy and security risks fails to meet the requirements of the HIPAA security rule. This oversight can lead to breaches of unsecured PHI, resulting in significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of patient trust. Ethically, it represents a failure to uphold the duty of care owed to individuals whose PHI is entrusted to the organization. Another incorrect approach that relies on vendor assurances without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. While vendors may offer security features, the responsibility for safeguarding PHI ultimately rests with the covered entity. Blindly trusting vendor claims without conducting an independent assessment can lead to unforeseen vulnerabilities and noncompliance. This approach neglects the due diligence required by HIPAA, a further incorrect approach that delays the privacy and security assessment until after implementation is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. This move fast and break things mentality is incompatible with healthcare privacy and security standards. It significantly increases the risk of breaches and noncompliance, as potential issues are not identified and mitigated proactively. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This includes 1. Identifying the technology or process change. 2. Conducting a comprehensive privacy and security impact assessment, including identifying all PHI involved, potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the likelihood and impact of breaches. 3. Evaluating existing safeguards and determining if additional controls are necessary. 4. Documenting the assessment and mitigation strategies. 5. Obtaining appropriate approvals based on the risk assessment. 6. Implementing the technology with the identified safeguards. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the assessment as the technology or threat landscape evolves. This iterative process ensures ongoing compliance and robust protection of PHI. Question 9. The performance metrics show a significant increase in data breaches over the past quarter, prompting a review of the organization's privacy and security protocols. Given the organization's provision of substance use disorder (SUD) treatment services, which are subject to specific federal confidentiality regulations, what is the most appropriate approach to assess the impact of these breaches and ensure future compliance? Option A. Perform an impact assessment solely based on HIPAA regulations, as it is the primary federal health privacy law governing most patient information. Option B. Rely on the existing data breach incident response plan to manage and mitigate the consequences of the reported breaches, assuming current privacy policies are adequate. Option C. Initiate a broad review of all organizational data handling policies and procedures, implementing standardized security enhancements across all departments to address the general increase in breaches. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment specifically focused on the handling of substance use disorder patient records, evaluating adherence to 42 CFR Part 2, and identifying any discrepancies with HIPAA requirements. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment specifically focused on the handling of substance use disorder patient records, evaluating adherence to 42 CFR Part 2, and identifying any discrepancies with HIPAA requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the complex interplay between a general federal privacy law, HIPAA, and a more specific, potentially more stringent federal law, 42 CFR Part 2, Governing substance use disorder, SUD, patient records. The organization must ensure compliance with both, recognizing that the stricter provisions of 42 CFR Part 2 will often supersede HIPAA when applicable. The risk of noncompliance includes significant penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of patient trust, particularly for vulnerable populations seeking SUD treatment. The performance metrics indicating an increase in data breaches necessitates a thorough review of existing policies and procedures, especially concerning sensitive data like SUD records. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that specifically scrutinizes the organization's handling of SUD patient records in light of 42 CFR Part 2. This assessment must identify all instances where 42 CFR Part 2 applies, determine if current practices meet or exceed its consent, disclosure, and security requirements, and evaluate any potential gaps compared to HIPAA. This approach is best professional practice because 42 CFR Part 2 imposes strict limitations on the disclosure of information related to federally assisted SUD programs, often requiring explicit patient consent for any disclosure, even for treatment, payment, or healthcare operations, unless specific exceptions apply. A focused impact assessment ensures that the organization is not inadvertently violating these stringent federal regulations, which are designed to protect individuals seeking sensitive treatment. This aligns with the ethical imperative to safeguard patient privacy and promote access to care without fear of unauthorized disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on HIPAA for the impact assessment is an incorrect approach because it fails to acknowledge the superseding and more restrictive nature of 42 CFR Part 2 for SUD records. This would lead to a false sense of security if current practices meet HIPAA standards, but fall short of 42 CFR Part 2 requirements, potentially resulting in unauthorized disclosures and regulatory violation. Implementing a blanket policy change across all patient data types without first assessing the specific risks associated with SUD records is also an incorrect approach. While a general review might be warranted, a targeted assessment of 42 CFR Part 2 compliance is critical. Overly broad changes could disrupt legitimate data sharing necessary for patient care, or introduce new vulnerabilities if not carefully designed. Relying on the organization's General Data Breach Incident Response Plan as the sole mechanism for addressing the performance metrics is insufficient. While the Incident Response Plan is crucial for managing breaches, it does not proactively address the underlying systemic issues that may have led to the increase in breaches, particularly concerning the unique privacy requirements of 42 CFR Part 2. A proactive impact assessment is needed to identify and mitigate risks before they result in breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first recognizing the hierarchy of regulations. When a specific federal law like 42 CFR Part 2 exists for a particular type of sensitive health information, its provisions generally take precedence over broader laws like HIPAA. The performance metrics serve as a trigger for a proactive risk assessment. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific types of data implicated by the performance metrics. In this case, increase in breaches suggests a need to review all sensitive data, but the prompt directs focus to SUD records. 2. Determining which specific regulations govern that data, 42 CFR Part 2 and HIPAA. 3. Conducting a gap analysis between current practices and the requirements of the most stringent applicable regulation, 42 CFR Part 2. 4. Implementing remediation based on the findings of the gap analysis. This systematic approach ensures that compliance is not just a matter of meeting minimum standards, but of actively protecting the most vulnerable patient populations. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that a U.S.-based healthcare provider is planning to offer telehealth services to patients residing in Brazil. The provider currently adheres to HIPAA regulations for its U.S. operations. To ensure compliance with international privacy laws, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate initial step for the organization? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment specifically tailored to the requirements of Brazil's Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, LGPD. Option B. Delegate the entire responsibility for international privacy compliance to the IT department to manage technical safeguards. Option C. Assume that HIPAA compliance is sufficient for all international operations, as it is a robust privacy framework. Option D. Implement a standardized global privacy policy that broadly covers data protection principles without specific jurisdictional adaptations. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment specifically tailored to the requirements of Brazil's Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, LGPD. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a healthcare organization to navigate the complexities of international data privacy laws when expanding its services to patients in other countries. The core challenge lies in understanding and applying diverse legal frameworks that may have different definitions of personal information, consent requirements, data transfer restrictions, and individual rights. A failure to do so can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of patient trust. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that specifically analyzes the requirements of the target country's privacy laws, such as Brazil's LGPD. This assessment should identify all personal health information that will be processed, the legal basis for processing, the data subject's rights under LGPD, and any cross-border data transfer mechanisms required. By proactively identifying and mitigating risks in alignment with LGPD, the organization demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to lawful and ethical data handling, thereby protecting patient privacy and ensuring compliance. An incorrect approach would be to assume that U.S. HIPAA regulations are sufficient for international operations. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because HIPAA is specific to the United States and does not govern the processing of personal data by entities operating within or targeting individuals in Brazil. Relying solely on HIPAA would violate LGPD provisions, potentially leading to fines and legal action in Brazil. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a generic, one-size-fits-all privacy policy without considering the specific nuances of LGPD. This approach fails to address the unique requirements of Brazilian data protection law, such as the explicit consent provisions or the rights of data subjects under LGPD, which may differ from those in other jurisdictions. This oversight constitutes an ethical failure to adequately inform and protect the privacy rights of Brazilian data subjects. A third incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire responsibility of international privacy compliance to the IT department, without involving legal and privacy experts. While IT plays a crucial role in technical safeguards, privacy law interpretation and strategic compliance require specialized legal and privacy knowledge. This division of responsibility is an ethical failure, as it neglects the critical legal and policy aspects of data protection, potentially leading to non-compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, risk-based approach. First, identify the scope of international operations and the types of personal data involved. Second, research and understand the specific privacy laws of each relevant jurisdiction. Third, conduct a thorough data protection impact assessment (DPIA) for each jurisdiction, focusing on data processing activities, legal bases, data subject rights, and data transfer mechanisms. Fourth, develop and implement tailored privacy policies, procedures, and technical safeguards that align with the requirements of each applicable law. Finally, establish ongoing monitoring and review processes to ensure continued compliance as laws and operations evolve. Question 11. The monitoring system demonstrates that a California resident has exercised their right to opt out of the sale of their personal information. The organization's current data sharing agreement with a third-party analytics provider involves sharing de-identified patient demographic data in exchange for insights that improve patient outreach programs. The organization's legal counsel has advised that this specific data sharing arrangement, due to the de-identification process, may not strictly constitute a sale under the CCPA/CPRA. However, the consumer's opt-out request was explicit and unambiguous. What is the most appropriate course of action for the organization to take regarding this consumer's data and the third-party analytics provider? Option A. Immediately cease sharing any personal information of this consumer with the third-party analytics provider, regardless of the de-identification status or the legal counsel's interpretation of sale, and update internal processes to ensure this consumer's opt-out preference is honored for all future data sharing activities. Option B. Continue sharing the data as usual but implement a note in the consumer's record indicating their opt-out request, without making any changes to the data sharing practices until further clarification from regulatory bodies. Option C. Proceed with sharing the de-identified demographic data with the third-party analytics provider as per the existing agreement, as the legal counsel's interpretation suggests it does not meet the definition of a sale, and inform the consumer that their request does not apply to this specific data sharing arrangement. Option D. Contact the consumer to clarify their intent and ask if they wish to opt out of sharing de-identified data, explaining the benefits of the analytics provider's insights for improving patient outreach programs. The correct answer is A. Immediately cease sharing any personal information of this consumer with the third-party analytics provider, regardless of the de-identification status or the legal counsel's interpretation of sale, and update internal processes to ensure this consumer's opt-out preference is honored for all future data sharing activities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the dynamic nature of consumer data rights under the CCPA and CPRA, and the need for a healthcare organization to maintain robust compliance while handling sensitive personal information. The organization must balance its operational needs with its legal obligations to California consumers regarding their data. The complexity arises from interpreting and implementing these rights across various data processing activities, and ensuring that the business practices align with the spirit and letter of the law, especially concerning the sale of data and the right to opt out. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the consumer's explicit request to opt out of the sale of their personal information, as mandated by the CCPA and further clarified by the CPRA. This involves ceasing the sharing of personal information with third parties for monetary or other valuable consideration, and ensuring that any mechanisms for opting out are clear, accessible, and effective. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to consumer privacy and regulatory compliance, minimizing the risk of enforcement actions and reputational damage. It aligns with the core principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring data is used only for the purposes for which it was collected or as permitted by law. An incorrect approach that fails to honor the consumer's opt-out request, even if the organization believes the sharing does not constitute a sale under a narrow interpretation, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. CCPA and CPRA broadly define sale to include sharing for valuable consideration, and a conservative, consumer-centric interpretation is generally advisable. Failing to provide a clear opt-out mechanism or ignoring a consumer's request violates the explicit rights granted to California consumers and could lead to substantial fines and legal penalties. Another incorrect approach might involve providing a complex or misleading opt-out process, which undermines the intent of the law and erodes consumer trust. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for consumer autonomy and privacy. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific consumer rights granted by the CCPA/CPRA, meticulously reviewing data sharing agreements and practices to identify potential sales of personal information, and implementing clear, user-friendly opt-out mechanisms. This involves ongoing training for staff, regular audits of data processing activities, and a commitment to transparency with consumers about their rights and how their data is handled. When faced with ambiguity, the framework should lean towards the interpretation that best protects consumer privacy and adheres to the spirit of the regulations. Question 12. The control framework reveals that a healthcare organization is struggling to effectively identify and prioritize potential threats to its electronic protected health information, EFI, due to a lack of a structured threat modeling process. Given the requirements of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, security rule, which of the following approaches would best address this challenge? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential threats to EPHI, analyzes their likelihood and potential impact, and prioritizes mitigation strategies based on the identified risks. Option B. Implement a broad set of technical security controls, such as firewalls and intrusion detection systems, without a specific threat analysis, assuming these will cover most potential vulnerabilities. Option C. Focus solely on identifying and mitigating known external cyber threats, such as ransomware and phishing attacks, as these are the most publicized risks. Option D. Rely on vendor-provided security assessments and recommendations without conducting an independent, organization-specific threat model. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential threats to EPHI, analyzes their likelihood and potential impact, and prioritizes mitigation strategies based on the identified risks. Explanation: the control framework reveals a common challenge in healthcare privacy and security, balancing the need for robust threat modeling with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the dynamic nature of healthcare operations. Identifying potential threats to protected health information. 5. Requires a systematic approach, but the sheer volume of data, diverse systems, and evolving threat landscape makes comprehensive analysis difficult. The professional challenge lies in prioritizing threats that pose the greatest risk to patient privacy and data integrity, while also ensuring compliance with the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act (HIPAA) security rule. The correct approach, focusing on a risk-based methodology that prioritizes threats based on their likelihood and impact, represents best professional practice. This aligns directly with the HIPAA security rules requirement for risk analysis, which mandates covered entities to identify and assess potential risks to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic PHI E5. By systematically evaluating threats, their potential impact on PHI, and the likelihood of their occurrence, organizations can develop targeted and effective mitigation strategies. This ensures that resources are allocated efficiently to address the most critical vulnerabilities, thereby enhancing overall security posture and maintaining patient trust. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on technical vulnerabilities without considering the human element or the specific context of PHI handling fails to meet the comprehensive requirements of HIPAA. For instance, prioritizing only known malware threats without assessing the risk of insider threats or unauthorized access due to poor access controls would be a significant regulatory failure. This overlooks the broad scope of security incidents as defined by HIPAA, which includes unauthorized acquisition, access, use, or disclosure of PHI. Another incorrect approach might be to implement generic security controls without a specific threat model, leading to inefficient resource allocation and potentially leaving critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence in conducting a thorough risk analysis as mandated by the security rule. Ethically, failing to adequately protect PHI due to an incomplete threat model can lead to breaches, patient harm, and erosion of public confidence in healthcare providers. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the organization's specific environment, including its data flows, systems, and user behaviors. This is followed by a systematic threat identification process, leveraging frameworks like STRIDE or PASTA, adapted for the healthcare context. Crucially, each identified threat must be analyzed for its potential impact on PHI and its likelihood of occurrence. This risk assessment then informs the prioritization of threats and the development of appropriate, layered mitigation strategies. Regular review and updates to the threat model are essential to adapt to new threats and changes within the organization. Question 13. System analysis indicates a healthcare organization is experiencing an increase in reported security incidents related to unauthorized access to electronic protected health information, E5. The organization currently utilizes a password-only authentication system for all users and has a basic role-based access control, RBAC framework in place, but access reviews are conducted only annually. What is the most effective approach to mitigate these risks and ensure compliance with U.S. healthcare regulations? Option A. Focus on encrypting all ePHI at rest and in transit, and conduct annual security awareness training for all staff. Option B. Expand the RBAC model to grant broader access to clinical staff to expedite patient care, and rely on audit logs to detect unauthorized access after it occurs. Option C. Implement multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all users, refine the RBAC model to strictly enforce the principle of least privilege, and increase the frequency of access reviews to quarterly. Option D. Enhance password complexity requirements and implement stricter firewall rules to prevent external access. The correct answer is C. Implement multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all users, refine the RBAC model to strictly enforce the principle of least privilege, and increase the frequency of access reviews to quarterly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare organizations. balancing the need for efficient access to patient information with robust security and privacy controls. The increasing reliance on digital health records and the diverse roles within a healthcare setting necessitate a structured approach to access management. The professional challenge lies in implementing controls that are both effective against evolving threats and practical for daily operations, while strictly adhering to U.S. healthcare regulations. Correct approach analysis. Implementing a comprehensive access control strategy that incorporates multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all users, a well-defined role-based access control RBAC model, and regular access reviews aligns with the principles of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA Security Rule. The HIPAA Security Rule mandates administrative, physical, and technical safeguards to protect electronic protected health information, E5. MFA is a critical technical safeguard that strengthens authentication beyond a single password, significantly reducing the risk of unauthorized access due to compromised credentials. RBAC ensures that users are granted access only to the information necessary for their job functions, embodying the principle of least privilege. Regular access reviews are essential for verifying that access rights remain appropriate and for identifying and rectifying any inappropriate access, which is a key component of ongoing risk management and compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on password-based authentication, even with strong password policies, is insufficient under HIPAA. Passwords can be easily compromised through phishing, brute force attacks, or insider threats, failing to meet the standard of reasonable and appropriate technical safeguards. This approach neglects the elevated risk associated with sensitive EPHI. Implementing RBAC without also enforcing MFA and conducting regular access reviews creates significant vulnerabilities. While RBAC limits access based on roles, if the initial role assignments are too broad or if access is not periodically reevaluated, unauthorized access can still occur. The lack of MFA means that even if a role is compromised, the attacker only needs a password to gain access. The absence of regular reviews means that outdated or excessive permissions may persist unchecked. Focusing exclusively on technical controls like firewalls and encryption without addressing user authentication and authorization is incomplete. While these are important safeguards, they do not directly prevent an authenticated but unauthorized individual from accessing EPHI. The HIPAA Security Rule requires a holistic approach that includes controls over user access and identity. Professional reasoning. Healthcare privacy and security professionals must adopt a risk-based approach to access control. This involves understanding the specific threats and vulnerabilities within their organization and implementing layered security controls. The decision-making process should prioritize controls that directly address the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI, as mandated by HIPAA. This includes a thorough assessment of authentication mechanisms, the definition and enforcement of authorization policies, like RBAC and least privilege, and the establishment of processes for ongoing monitoring and review of access. Professionals should consult HIPAA guidance and relevant NIST frameworks to inform their strategies. Question 14. Stakeholder feedback indicates that the current risk assessment process for electronic protected health information, E5, is perceived as overly broad and time-consuming, leading to a desire for a more streamlined approach. Given the requirements of the HIPAA Security Rule, which of the following methodologies best balances the need for thoroughness with practical efficiency in identifying and prioritizing risks to EPHI? Option A. A methodology that concentrates on identifying all known vulnerabilities within the IT infrastructure without explicitly considering the threats that could exploit them. Option B. A methodology that focuses exclusively on the types of security incidents that have been reported most frequently in the past year. Option C. A methodology that systematically identifies all EPHI assets, potential threats to those assets, existing vulnerabilities, and then assesses the likelihood of threat occurrence and the potential impact of a breach to derive a risk score. Option D. A methodology that prioritizes risks based solely on the potential severity of impact, regardless of the likelihood of the threat occurring. The correct answer is C. A methodology that systematically identifies all EPHI assets, potential threats to those assets, existing vulnerabilities, and then assesses the likelihood of threat occurrence and the potential impact of a breach to derive a risk score. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for comprehensive risk assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources, while ensuring compliance with U.S. healthcare privacy and security regulations, specifically the HIPAA security rule. The core challenge lies in selecting a risk assessment methodology that is both effective in identifying and prioritizing risks to electronic protected health information, (EFI), and aligns with the mandated requirements of the HIPAA security rule. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the requirements of the HIPAA security rule's risk analysis standard. This standard mandates a thorough risk analysis that includes identifying and evaluating the likelihood and impact of potential threats and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI. A methodology that systematically identifies assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and then analyzes their potential impact and likelihood, leading to a risk score, is essential for meeting these regulatory obligations. This structured approach allows for informed decision-making regarding the implementation of security safeguards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most frequently reported incidents fails to meet regulatory requirements because it neglects the potential impact of less frequent but potentially catastrophic threats. HIPAA security rule requires an assessment of all potential risks, not just those that have already materialized. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only high-impact risks without considering likelihood overlooks the practical reality that even low-likelihood events can pose significant risks if their impact is severe. Conversely, an approach that focuses exclusively on vulnerabilities without considering the threats that exploit them is incomplete, as a vulnerability only becomes a risk when a threat can exploit it. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory mandates, HIPAA security rule in this case. This involves dissecting the requirements for risk analysis, including identifying all EPHI assets, potential threats, existing vulnerabilities, and then evaluating the likelihood of threat occurrence and the potential impact of a breach. The chosen methodology should facilitate this systematic evaluation, leading to a prioritized list of risks that can then be addressed through appropriate security measures. This process ensures that resources are allocated effectively to mitigate the most significant risks to EPHI. Question 15. Assessment of the security considerations for migrating protected health information, (FI), to a cloud computing environment, as outlined by the Cloud Security Alliance (CSA) guidance, requires a healthcare organization to perform which of the following actions to ensure compliance with U.S. healthcare regulations? Option A. Prioritize the selection of the cloud service provider based primarily on cost-effectiveness and feature set, assuming their security measures are adequate for healthcare data. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the cloud service provider's security controls and compliance posture, verifying their alignment with HIPAA security rule requirements and ensuring a robust business associate agreement is in place. Option C. Accept the cloud service provider's general security certifications and marketing claims as sufficient evidence of compliance without further independent verification. Option D. Rely on the assumption that all cloud services inherently meet U.S. healthcare regulatory standards for data privacy and security. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the cloud service provider's security controls and compliance posture, verifying their alignment with HIPAA security rule requirements, and ensuring a robust business associate agreement is in place. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a healthcare organization to balance the benefits of cloud computing, such as scalability and cost efficiency, with the stringent privacy and security mandates of U.S. healthcare regulations, particularly HIPAA. The complexity arises from the shared responsibility model inherent in cloud services, where the organization retains ultimate accountability for protected health information, (FI), even when it resides on a third-party provider's infrastructure. A thorough impact assessment is crucial to identify and mitigate risks before migrating sensitive data, ensuring compliance and protecting patient privacy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that specifically evaluates the security controls and compliance posture of the cloud service provider, CSP, against HIPAA security rule requirements. This includes scrutinizing the CSP's data encryption capabilities, in transit and at rest, access controls, audit logging, incident response procedures, and business associate agreement (BA) terms. The assessment must also consider the specific types of PHI being migrated and the potential impact of a breach. This aligns with the HIPAA security rules mandate for risk analysis, 45 CFR Section 164, 308A, 1, Roman 2A, and the need for covered entities to ensure their business associates maintain appropriate safeguards. The Cloud Security Alliance, CSA guidance, particularly its security considerations for cloud computing document, provides a framework for evaluating these technical and organizational safeguards, reinforcing the need for due diligence in selecting and managing cloud services. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the CSP's marketing materials and general security certifications without a specific, in-depth assessment of their controls as they apply to the organization's PHI. This fails to meet the HIPAA requirement for a thorough risk analysis, as it bypasses the critical step of verifying that the CSP's security measures are adequate for the specific data being handled and the organization's risk tolerance. It also ignores the principle of due diligence in selecting a business associate. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize cost savings and service features over security and compliance. While cost is a factor, it cannot supersede the legal and ethical obligations to protect PHI. Choosing a CSP based primarily on price, without adequately assessing their security posture and willingness to enter into a compliant BAA, is a direct violation of HIPAA intent and could lead to significant penalties. A third incorrect approach is to assume that all cloud services are inherently secure and compliant with HIPAA. This is a dangerous misconception. The shared responsibility model means the organization must actively manage its security responsibilities, which includes vetting the CSP's security practices. Failing to perform an independent assessment and relying on assumptions rather than verified controls is a critical compliance failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach cloud security assessments by first understanding the specific data being migrated and its sensitivity. Then, they should consult relevant guidance, such as the CSA's security considerations for cloud computing, to identify key areas of inquiry. The next step is to develop a detailed checklist of security and compliance requirements derived from HIPAA and other applicable regulations. This checklist should be used to rigorously evaluate potential CSPs, including reviewing their security documentation, requesting evidence of compliance, and scrutinizing the proposed BAA. The process should be iterative, involving ongoing monitoring and reassessment of the CSP's security posture throughout the engagement. This systematic approach ensures that all critical aspects of cloud security and regulatory compliance are addressed, mitigating risks and safeguarding patient data. Question 16. Comparative studies suggest that healthcare organizations face increasing challenges in securing protected health information, PHI, across its entire life cycle. A healthcare provider is evaluating its data encryption strategy to enhance compliance with U.S. healthcare regulations. They are considering implementing a solution that encrypts data at rest using AES 256 and data in transit using TLS 1.2. However, the proposed solution does not explicitly address the encryption of data while it is actively being processed or used by applications. Which of the following approaches best aligns with comprehensive data protection requirements for PHI under U.S. healthcare regulations and best practices? Option A. Implement AES 256 for data at rest and TLS 1.2 for data in transit, and explore advanced techniques like homomorphic encryption or secure enclaves for data in use, coupled with a robust key management system. Option B. Focus primarily on encrypting data at rest, as this represents the largest volume of stored PHI, and consider encryption for data in transit as a secondary priority. Option C. Utilize older, less computationally intensive encryption algorithms like DES for data at rest and basic SSL for data in transit to improve performance. Option D. Rely solely on AES 256 for data at rest and TLS 1.2 for data in transit, assuming that access controls are sufficient to protect data when it is in use. The correct answer is A. Implement AES 256 for data at rest and TLS 1.2 for data in transit, and explore advanced techniques like homomorphic encryption or secure enclaves for data in use, coupled with a robust key management system. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common yet complex challenge in healthcare privacy and security. balancing the need for robust data protection with the operational realities of data access and usability. The core difficulty lies in implementing effective encryption strategies for data at rest, in transit, and crucially, data in use, while adhering to stringent U.S. healthcare regulations like HIPAA. The rapid evolution of technology and the increasing volume of sensitive patient data, necessitate a proactive and informed approach to encryption, making the selection and management of algorithms and keys a critical decision point. The potential for breaches, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage underscores the need for meticulous planning and execution. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a multi-layered encryption strategy that addresses data across its lifecycle. For data at rest, employing strong, industry-standard symmetric encryption algorithms like AES 256 provides efficient and secure protection for large volumes of data stored on servers, databases, and endpoints. For data in transit, utilizing secure protocols such as TLS1, 2 or higher ensures that PHI transmitted over networks, including internal and external communications, remains confidential and unaltered. The most challenging aspect, data in use, requires advanced techniques like homomorphic encryption or secure enclaves, which allow data to be processed while encrypted, thereby minimizing exposure during analysis or application use. Robust key management practices, including secure generation, storage, rotation, and destruction of encryption keys, are paramount. This approach aligns with HIPAA security rule requirements for safeguarding electronic PHI, E5, through appropriate technical safeguards, including encryption, and the NIST Special Publication 800-53 Controls for Encryption and Key Management. It demonstrates a commitment to comprehensive data protection throughout the data lifecycle, minimizing the attack surface and reducing the risk of unauthorized access or disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on encryption for data at rest and in transit, while neglecting the security of data in use. This creates a significant vulnerability, as PHI can be exposed when accessed by authorized personnel or applications. This failure to address data in use directly contravenes the spirit and intent of HIPAA security provisions, which mandate protection against unauthorized access, use, or disclosure of ePHI. Another incorrect approach might be the use of outdated or weak encryption algorithms, such as DES or MD5, which are known to be cryptographically insecure and susceptible to brute force attacks. Employing such algorithms would be a clear violation of the HIPAA security rules requirement for using appropriate technical safeguards and would expose the organization to a high risk of data breach. A third incorrect approach could be inadequate key management, such as storing encryption keys alongside the encrypted data or using easily guessable keys. This renders the encryption ineffective, as compromised keys would grant immediate access to the protected data. Such practices would fail to meet the security standards expected under HIPAA and would demonstrate a lack of due diligence in protecting sensitive patient information. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, continuously assessing threats and vulnerabilities to PHI. This involves understanding the data lifecycle and implementing appropriate encryption controls at each stage. A thorough understanding of HIPAA regulations, NIST guidelines, and current encryption best practices is essential. When evaluating encryption solutions, consider factors such as algorithm strength, performance impact, key management complexity, and the specific use cases for the data. Regular security audits, penetration testing, and employee training are crucial to ensure the effectiveness of encryption strategies and to foster a culture of security awareness. Decision-making should prioritize the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of PHI, always aiming to exceed minimum regulatory requirements to provide the highest level of protection. Question 17. The assessment process reveals that a healthcare organization's network infrastructure, which houses significant amounts of electronic protected health information, E5, has become increasingly complex with the adoption of new medical devices and remote access capabilities. While perimeter firewalls are in place, the internal network remains largely flat, posing a significant risk of lateral movement for potential attackers. The organization is considering implementing network segmentation to enhance security. Which of the following approaches best addresses this implementation challenge in accordance with the HIPAA security rule? Option A. Implement a phased network segmentation strategy, starting with the most critical ePHI repositories and patient care systems, while conducting thorough risk assessments and user impact analyses for each phase. Option B. Deploy a single, high-capacity firewall at the network edge and assume this will adequately protect the internal network from advanced threats. Option C. Focus solely on strengthening wireless security protocols for all devices, as this is identified as the primary entry point for recent security concerns. Option D. Immediately segment the entire network into numerous small zones without prior assessment, relying on the assumption that more segmentation is always better. The correct answer is A. Implement a phased network segmentation strategy, starting with the most critical ePHI repositories and patient care systems, while conducting thorough risk assessments and user impact analyses for each phase. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare organizations, balancing robust network security with the operational needs of diverse departments. The core difficulty lies in implementing effective network segmentation without disrupting critical patient care workflows or introducing new vulnerabilities. A deep understanding of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act (HIPAA) security rule is paramount here, specifically its requirements for administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. The correct approach emphasizes a phased, risk-based implementation of network segmentation, prioritizing the protection of electronic protected health information (E5), while ensuring minimal disruption. This aligns with HIPAA emphasis on risk analysis and management. By segmenting the network, the organization can isolate sensitive data, limit the blast radius of a potential breach, and apply more stringent security controls to critical areas. This proactive measure is a cornerstone of a comprehensive security program, demonstrating due diligence in safeguarding ePHI. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately address the complexities of healthcare environments and HIPAA requirements. Implementing a blanket, one-size-fits-all segmentation strategy without proper assessment risks creating operational bottlenecks and may not effectively protect all ePHI. Similarly, relying solely on perimeter defenses without internal segmentation leaves the network vulnerable to lateral movement by attackers who breach the outer defenses. Ignoring the need for ongoing monitoring and policy updates after segmentation creates a false sense of security, as the threat landscape and organizational needs evolve. These approaches demonstrate a lack of thorough risk analysis and a failure to implement appropriate technical safeguards as mandated by HIPAA. Professionals must adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive risk assessment. This assessment should identify critical assets, data flows, and potential threats. Based on this, a layered security strategy can be developed, incorporating technologies like firewalls, IDs/IPS, and VPNs, alongside architectural controls like network segmentation. The implementation should be phased, with thorough testing and validation at each stage. Continuous monitoring, regular policy reviews, and ongoing staff training are essential to maintain the effectiveness of the security posture. Question 18. To address the challenge of streamlining patient data access for care coordination while ensuring strict adherence to HIPAA regulations, a healthcare organization is reviewing its internal processes for disclosing protected health information. 5. The organization wants to optimize how different departments, including billing, clinical care, and patient advocacy, access and utilize PHI. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the HIPAA privacy rules requirements for covered entities and business associates? The definition of PHI, uses and disclosures, patient rights, the minimum necessary standard, and breach notification. Option A. Implement a system-wide access policy that grants all clinical staff read-only access to all patient EHRs, and require billing staff to submit a formal request for specific patient financial information, with a standard turnaround time of 48 hours. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all current and proposed PHI disclosure processes, identifying specific purposes for each disclosure, assessing the minimum necessary PHI required for each purpose, and implementing granular access controls and audit trails within the EHR system. This includes ensuring all business associates have executed compliant business associate agreements. Option C. Develop a new internal portal where all patient demographic and appointment information is consolidated, accessible to any employee with a company ID, to improve interdepartmental communication regarding patient scheduling and follow-ups. Option D. Mandate that all PHI requests, regardless of the requesting party or purpose, be routed through the privacy officer for individual approval, thereby ensuring maximum control over all disclosures. The correct answer is A. Implement a system-wide access policy that grants all clinical staff read-only access to all patient EHRs, and require billing staff to submit a formal request for specific patient financial information, with a standard turnaround time of 48 hours. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare organizations, balancing the need for efficient data sharing to improve patient care with the stringent requirements of the HIPAA privacy rule. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that any process optimization for PHI disclosure adheres strictly to the minimum necessary standard and maintains the integrity of patient privacy rights, particularly when dealing with multiple departments and varying levels of access needs. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to significant breaches and penalties. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a systematic review and re-engineering of existing disclosure processes. This involves identifying all current disclosure pathways, assessing their necessity and scope against the minimum necessary standard, and implementing technical and administrative safeguards to limit access to only the PHI required for a specific purpose. This aligns directly with HIPAA emphasis on safeguarding PHI and empowering patients with control over their information. By focusing on a documented, risk-based approach, the organization demonstrates due diligence in complying with the privacy rules requirements for uses and disclosures, patient rights, and breach prevention. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves broadly granting access to all electronic health records, (EHR), for any staff member involved in patient care, assuming a general need. This violates the minimum necessary standard by providing access to more PHI than is required for a specific job function or task. It also fails to implement appropriate access controls and audit trails, increasing the risk of unauthorized access and disclosures. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on verbal agreements with business associates for the secure handling of PHI without a formal business associate agreement, (BA). This is a direct violation of HIPAA, which mandates a written BAA outlining the specific safeguards the business associate must implement to protect PHI. Without a BAA, the covered entity remains liable for any breaches caused by the business associate. A third incorrect approach is to assume that all information within an EHR is automatically considered PHI and therefore subject to the same level of protection, regardless of context. While all PHI must be protected, the HIPAA privacy rule defines PHI based on its connection to an individual's past, present, or future health condition, provision of healthcare, or payment for healthcare. Not all data within an EHR may meet this definition, and overprotection can hinder legitimate, compliant uses and disclosures. However, the primary failure here is not in the protection itself, but in the lack of a structured process to identify and manage PHI appropriately, which can lead to inefficiencies and potential misclassifications. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization for PHI disclosure by first conducting a comprehensive inventory of all current and proposed disclosure activities. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment to identify potential vulnerabilities and areas of noncompliance. Implementing role-based access controls, robust audit trails, and clear policies and procedures that explicitly address the minimum necessary standard are crucial. Regular training for all staff on HIPAA requirements, including the definition of PHI, patient rights, and breach notification procedures, is essential. Furthermore, ensuring that all business associate relationships are governed by compliant BAAs is a non-negotiable requirement. This systematic, documented, and risk mitigation-focused approach ensures that process improvements enhance efficiency without compromising patient privacy or regulatory compliance. Question 19. The control framework reveals that a research institution intends to use anonymized patient health data for a large-scale epidemiological study. While the data has been aggregated and some identifiers removed, the process of anonymization is not fully validated to meet GDPR's strict definition of irreversible de-identification. Patients were not explicitly asked for consent for this specific research use at the time of data collection, though general consent for secondary use of anonymized data was obtained. A data subject has now requested a copy of their data in a structured, machine-readable format for the purpose of data portability, citing their rights under GDPR. Which of the following actions best aligns with GDPR requirements? Option A. Provide the data subject with their data in a structured, machine-readable format, while simultaneously initiating a review of the anonymization process to ensure it meets GDPR standards, and if not, seeking explicit consent for the research use of their data. Option B. Inform the data subject that their data is considered anonymized and therefore outside the scope of GDPR, and that data portability rights do not apply. Option C. Refuse the data subject's request for data portability, citing the complexity of extracting individual data from the aggregated research dataset, and the fact that consent for secondary use was already obtained. Option D. Proceed with the research using the aggregated data without further action, as the initial consent for secondary use of anonymized data is sufficient, and the data is considered sufficiently de-identified for research purposes. The correct answer is A. Provide the data subject with their data in a structured, machine-readable format, while simultaneously initiating a review of the anonymization process to ensure it meets GDPR standards, and if not, seeking explicit consent for the research use of their data. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare privacy, balancing the need for data processing for research with the stringent requirements of GDPR concerning patient consent and data subject rights. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the nuances of GDPR, particularly regarding the lawful basis for processing sensitive health data, the scope of consent, and the implications of data portability for research datasets. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without unduly hindering valuable research that could benefit public health. The correct approach prioritizes obtaining explicit, informed consent for research purposes, clearly outlining the scope of data processing and the right to withdraw. It also acknowledges the data subject's right to data portability, which in this context means providing a structured, commonly used and machine-readable format of their data, even if it's for research. This aligns with GDPR emphasis on transparency, purpose limitation, and data minimization, and upholds the fundamental rights of individuals over their personal data. Specifically, Article 6(1)(a) consent and Article 9(2)(a) explicit consent for special categories of data are critical here. The right to data portability under Article 20 is also paramount, requiring the provision of data in a usable format. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a legitimate interest basis for processing sensitive health data for research would fail to meet the higher threshold required by GDPR for such data. Article 9. Legitimate interest is generally not considered a sufficient lawful basis for processing special categories of personal data like health information, especially without explicit consent. Another incorrect approach that ignores the data subject's request for data portability, arguing it's impractical for research datasets, directly violates Article 20 of GDPR. This failure to provide data in a structured, machine-readable format is a significant regulatory breach. Finally, an approach that assumes anonymization is automatically achieved through aggregation without a robust de-identification process, and then proceeds without consent would be flawed, as GDPR applies to pseudonymized data, and the definition of anonymization is strict. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the type of data involved, sensitive health data, and the intended processing purpose, research. They must then determine the most appropriate lawful basis under GDPR, prioritizing explicit consent for sensitive data. Next, they should consider all applicable data subject rights, including access, rectification, erasure, restriction, and data portability, and establish procedures to fulfill these requests. For cross-border transfers, they must ensure appropriate safeguards are in place as per Chapter V of GDPR. Regular training and consultation with legal and privacy experts are essential to navigate these complex requirements. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates that a healthcare organization is utilizing a single, shared administrative password for all access to its electronic health record (EHR) system, and has disabled audit logging for system access to improve performance. The organization also restricts all access to patient data to the physical office location during standard business hours. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the HIPAA security rules requirements for data security and protection? Option A. Maintain the shared administrative password for EHR access, but implement a policy requiring all users to log their access manually in a separate ledger to compensate for the lack of system audit logs. Option B. Continue using the shared administrative password for all EHR access, as it simplifies user management and ensures all staff can access necessary information quickly, while disabling audit logging to maintain system speed. Option C. Restrict EHR access to only authorized IT personnel and require all other staff to submit written requests for patient information, which will be retrieved by IT and delivered via unsecured email. Option D. Implement role-based access controls (RBAC) for the EHR system, ensuring users only have access to the minimum necessary PHI for their job functions, and enable comprehensive audit logging of all access and modifications to PHI. The correct answer is D. Implement role-based access controls (RBAC) for the EHR system, ensuring users only have access to the minimum necessary PHI for their job functions, and enable comprehensive audit logging of all access and modifications to PHI. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare data security, balancing the need for efficient data access for patient care with robust protection against unauthorized disclosure, particularly in the context of evolving technological capabilities and regulatory expectations. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act (HIPAA) security rules requirements for access controls and audit trails in a practical, yet compliant manner. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any implemented solution not only meets technical specifications, but also upholds patient privacy rights and organizational security policies. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the HIPAA security rules requirements for access control and audit. Specifically, implementing role-based access controls (RBAC) ensures that users only have access to the minimum necessary protected health information (PHI) to perform their job functions, aligning with the principle of least privilege. Furthermore, comprehensive audit logging of all access and modifications to PHI provides a critical mechanism for detecting and investigating potential security incidents, a core tenet of the HIPAA security rules safeguard requirements. This approach is proactive, layered, and directly supports the organization's obligation to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic PHI (EPHI). An incorrect approach that relies solely on a single, broad administrative password for all users fails to meet the HIPAA security rules requirements for unique user identification and access control. This practice creates a significant security vulnerability, as it is impossible to determine who accessed or modified specific PHI, thus hindering any audit or investigation efforts. It also violates the principle of least privilege, as all users would have unfettered access regardless of their role. Another incorrect approach that involves disabling audit logging to improve system performance is a direct contravention of the HIPAA security rule. Audit logs are essential for monitoring system activity, detecting security breaches, and ensuring accountability. Disabling them creates a blind spot, making it impossible to identify unauthorized access or malicious activity, and thus failing to meet the organization's obligation to implement appropriate security measures. A third incorrect approach that restricts access to PHI only during business hours, without considering the need for emergency access or the potential for remote work, is also problematic. While access controls are crucial, they must be implemented in a way that does not unduly impede necessary patient care or operational efficiency. The HIPAA security rule requires that access controls be appropriate to the risks and vulnerabilities identified, and a blanket restriction without considering exceptions or alternative secure access methods may not be adequate. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities to PHI. This assessment should inform the development and implementation of security policies and procedures that align with HIPAA requirements. Professionals should prioritize solutions that offer layered security, including strong access controls, robust audit capabilities, and regular security awareness training for staff. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of security measures are also essential to adapt to evolving threats and maintain compliance.